Guns were not only created to fight an opposing force from another country, but to also fight a domesticated force that threatens civil authority. Ladies and gentlemen, our stance in this motion is that we oppose this motion, because the goal that we want to achieve here is to show how dangerous the motion actually is, and to show how ignorant the proposition is, and also to give alternatives, but also improvements in the current status quo. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we believe the proposition is completely ignorant and gives only superficial and fallacious arguments. Because one, they fail to mention the likelihood of men actually accepting the policy. Two, fail to mention the likelihood of criminals actually benefiting from the motion and also finding ways to counteract it. And three, how to actually do the mechanism, how to actually put this bill into motion. They still haven't told the prerequisites and it's still super vague. And four, they fail to mention the root causes of the crime and severely misrepresents men in the motion. Because on to my rebuttals. For my first rebuttal is how guns corrupt men. We oppose this because gender does not define ownership of or responsibility. Because the point of negation is first, it's because of society corrupting men. They mention that how men are able to be corrupted by society and as a result use guns for violence. But it's completely contradictory because it shows that it isn't the problem with men, but it's the problem with the current society and how they treat men. Another thing is reality check. See, they mention that 90% of crimes are committed by men, but they fail to mention how those crimes are not only directed towards women, but also property and even other men. But it's not just because they happen to own a gun, but it's because of the GONE policy, or crime because of greed, opportunity, needs, or of course, environment. So by saying it's all because of guns, undermine the prerequisites of the real cause of those crimes, which is dangerous. And a point of symmetrization is crimes will still happen on both sides, yes, but it will be more dangerous in the proposition side because it runs the risk of vigilantism from male perpetrators who feel like the law is sexist and will take out those feelings of anger towards women, which of course nobody wants because that directly poses a threat to women. And to my second point of a rebuttal is how limiting gun access will reduce crime. We don't believe that because a point of negation, again, this will only affect male civilians, whilst criminals who actually bought the guns off the black market, because are those criminals just going to gun stores and then saying, here's my permit, here's my paperwork, can I buy a gun now? Can I buy a gun now? Of course not. They buy it off of people who already obtain guns illegally, which make this motion completely insufficient. And from this, it will result in horrible things. Like, for example, now they know male only carries, like, for example, like you said, pocket knives. Criminals will see that male will become an easier victim and result in more male-to-male crimes being done. And also, a reality check. For example, in the Alcohol Prohibition Act in the United States back in the 1990s, which backfired because it doesn't only remove people from drinking alcohol, but it will result in people seeing that the government is unjust and untrustworthy because they provide no good reason to take alcohol away, and now they start to manufacture alcohol secretly and consume it more, which will also be applicable to guns, of course. But to my third point is less illegal distribution. A point of negation again. Illegal distributors already obtain their weapons illegally. So through this law, nothing will actually change. And a reality check for you is the law will not only impact this law will only impact law-abiding citizens. And through this, distributors will now have the incentive to try to appeal to those male civilians and not only male criminals to buy their guns, which is, again, dangerous. Because I want to flip something. You see, in the real world, gun death is higher in the male population. Why? It's because both criminals and civilians has guns, which means they both have an incentive to actually finish the other side off. So through this logic, it will not only allow criminals to have a reason to target females first instead of male civilians, but also incentivize them to actually kill that women since they have a gun and pose a threat to the criminal's livelihood, which is of course something that we do not want. Because moving on to my argument, for my first argument, the way that we will actually oppose the motion is by doing gun education for both male and females. Because the problem that we want to solve here for my first point is the lack of education not only to the dangers of gun use, but also the lack of knowledge on how to actually use the guns properly and efficiently in society. Why does this even happen? Well, for my second point, it happens because guns are often seen as, sure, a tool of destruction, but also as something that is cool and something that provides power to both male and female and even other gender spectrums. And how do we solve this problem for my third point? Is to make gun safety a mandatory subject in school or universities or other education programs and sectors, and to show uneducated folks how dangerous a gun is by, one, community training with police officers, so they may know what the dangers of gun use and also how criminals can use guns for bad things and how to defend themselves from criminals. And other thing is gun instructors on how to actually utilize the guns correctly. And of course, people want this because it will create a public safety act where people can not only wait for police to help them if there's a criminal, but can actually act on those criminals by themselves, which makes the environment much more safer for not only females, but also kids and males and other gender spectrums. And for my second argument is how stricter gun laws will fix this. Because the problem that we want to solve for my first point is the rampant misuse of guns and the lack of strict sanctions on the people who owns guns illegally and the distributors of illegal selling and buying of guns in third parties. Why does this even happen? For my second point is the sentence of owning illegal guns is light, not as heavy as actually using that to commit homicide and other crimes. And also the few crackdowns that the government has on illegal gun distributors and also third-party gun distributors. Because like I said before, the proposition has failed to mention who is responsible and who's vulnerable. Because in our side, the person who is responsible for this is of course the government and the law and of course law institutions. And who's vulnerable is not only females but also males and basically the common populace and even the criminals that run the risk of going to jail or even dying in confrontations. But before we get out of context, how do we solve this problem for my third point? How do we solve this problem is by stricter laws on the ownership of guns and its background checks. See? And a flagged people. So people who recently got released from prison because of gun-related issues are not allowed to have guns in the first place, and other dangerous criminals who, for example, are mentally unstable because the proposition has failed to mention prerequisites of like crimes of guns. And let's go to my impacts. It will be good because first, it prevents the oversimplifications of the reasons behind gun violence, since we can actually focus on the root causes of why these problems happen, like the GONE policy, like I mentioned before, but how mental instability can cause gun violence. And it's exclusive because in the proposition side, they fail to mention that. And they only say that men have higher masculinity and they want to assert control over the female populace, which is not good. And it also upholds civil rights and prevent the misuse of identity politics by people who use this new law to invite women to vote for them because, hey, we care about women, so we won't allow men to own guns, which is not good. And nobody likes identity politics because it undermines the real reasons on why someone should vote for a person. And that is why we are proud to propose